Hello, this is Tom Still from the Wisconsin Technology Council, and thank you for joining us on today's edition of WISBusiness.com, the show. The show is produced in conjunction with the Tech Council and WISBusiness.com, and with the help of our sponsors, BDO, UWM, and Exact Sciences. Before we hear from Jackie Hein and her story with Plum Pharmaceuticals, we'll talk a little bit about some upcoming events. On August 25th, we'll have a webinar that features the USONA Institute and its fight against depression using some novel therapies. September 16th, we'll have part 2 in our Endless Frontier series. This will be more about how the bill works, and it'll feature U.S. Representatives Mike Gallagher and Ro Khanna, who are the bipartisan co-sponsors in the House of Representatives of this bill. This bill aims to invest a lot of money over time in America's science and tech infrastructure. September 22nd, we'll hear from Spencer X. Smith on social media in the COVID age. November 10th and 11th are the dates for our Wisconsin Early Stage Symposium. Watch our news releases and our event releases on how your company can present in this conference. And as always, you can learn more at wisconsintechnologycouncil.com. Thank you for joining in today's edition of WISBusiness.com, the show. Today, we're going to hear from Jackie Hein. She's one of the principals in Plum Pharmaceuticals. And Plum Pharma, they are a Madison-based drug delivery company through a unique platform. And they won the 2020 version of the Wisconsin Governor's Business Plan Contest. And so we're so proud to have them with us here today. Hello, Jackie.
Hello, thanks for having me.
You bet. Well, hey, tell us a little bit about how your platform works and why your first application that you've chosen is focused on opioid addiction.
Sure. So Plum Pharmaceuticals has a platform technology using something called lipid nanoparticle technology. So what that means is if you imagine like a little droplet that you can fill with medication and then inject it under the skin and have it release slowly over time. And that's really what we're able to do. And we can do that with medications that are already in existence, or we could do it with potentially proprietary medications that the company may be developing. We started, actually the founders originally developed the technology to work with the veterinary patients. So to help improve pain management in animals. And then further development of the platform, they realized that there really are so many applications. And so really did the pivot more toward human applications. And at that time, the opioid epidemic, opioid addiction, was really starting to ramp up. And so the need was becoming more and more apparent. And so their first application was for the development of naltrexone, which is a drug to treat opioid addiction. And there's about 2.5 million people diagnosed with opioid addiction each year, and economic burdens of $78 billion. So really it was the need and the potential market that drove us to that.
Very good. And well, as we all well know, the world's been focused for some time on the spread of the coronavirus and the COVID-19 pandemic. Does the Plum platform in general have potential to take part in the fight against that disease? And in a different vein, are you worried that serious conditions that existed long before COVID-19 are getting less attention as the pandemic wears on?
So yes, yes, and yes. So I think the answer to the first question about Plum's role in COVID is potentially. So we did submit a grant to NSF to apply our platform technology to some of the antivirals that are being identified as potential for treatment of COVID-19. So we'll find out if we get to do a little more work on that when we hear back from the National Science Foundation. The potential would be that the extended release maybe would help with adherence or compliance with taking medications, and potentially even chemoprophylactics or preventing healthcare providers from contracting COVID-19. But that would be really early, and we hope to be able to do some of that work with funding from NSF. to answer your second question, which is, are serious conditions being overlooked? Yeah, unfortunately, I think that is the case. Not only is it being overlooked, but opioid use disorder is really ramping up during COVID-19 for a couple of reasons. One, social distancing puts people, it's a stressor, potential trigger for drug use. Also, people are tending to use by themselves so that there's no one there to call 911 if they need help. And that's also a potential problem. 35 states have identified an increase in opioid use disorder since COVID-19 started.
Oh.
There's also a significant lack of access to treatment with social distancing. So some of those open meetings that people maybe would go to for support aren't being held, or are harder to find, or admitting fewer people and things like that. Outpatient are going to Zoom meetings and things like that. So it's not ideal. The need is still there.
Yeah. Unfortunately, some things that existed long before COVID are still there. They're just a bit in the background, and that's not good.
Right. I mean, think about the emergency rooms that were treating so many overdoses, are now treating all of those same overdoses in even more, in some states, and then are also dealing with COVID. So it's just amazing, the burden on the healthcare.
Yeah. So you emerged on top in this year's Wisconsin Governor's Business Plan Contest out of 200 entries. And so congratulations again. What did you and your team learn by taking part in the contest? And what would you tell those who are thinking about entering in 2021 or some future year?
Sure. Well, my first off, I would say absolutely participate. We're thrilled to have won. It was a good process, even if we hadn't come out completely on top. A couple of the specific learnings that we had, certainly being able to write a narrative that was going to be understandable to non-scientific and non-healthcare providers was very helpful. Certainly that's something that we do when we talk to investors, but it really helped us formalize some of that. And then, of course, developing a very detailed plan on how we would monetize that value proposition. So it was really helpful. Now, I don't know if everybody knows, but it's a phased process, or maybe you do and have forgotten. So at each phase, we got feedback from business leaders in the community and reviewers for each of the phases, and that was really helpful. So initially, it's not the whole 15 to 20 page business plan, it's just a couple of paragraphs. And even some of that initial feedback was really helpful to go back to the team with. So that was really great. We also enjoyed meeting the other teams that were participating, and made some great connections there that we've maintained today. So.
Oh, thank you, Jackie. And your point is well taken. I mean, we've always produced this process so that people can walk before they have to run. I mean, you don't start with that full business plan. Now, by the way, for those who can stay and watch the rest of this, you'll see Jackie's actual presentation from this year's Entrepreneurs Conference when she and the Plum team won. And that will tell you even more about what Plum Pharma is up to. So, Jackie, thanks again. Congratulations. And we really appreciate you joining us today for Wisp Business to Show.
Thank you so much for having me. Hi, I'm Jackie Hein, the CEO for Plum Pharmaceuticals. The team at Plum has a platform technology for extended release formulations. We use lipid nanoparticle technology, or liposomes. So if you imagine a little droplet that you can fill with medication and then inject it under the skin and have it release slowly over time. Now, liposome technology has actually been around for a while, but the team at Plum has patented a platform that more efficiently loads the medication into that little liposome, and that correlates to a longer release duration. So why do we need extended release medications? Well, if you don't take your medication, it's not going to work for you. And the top reasons for treatment failure are a lack of compliance, high cost, and complex regimens. And extended release allows for more cost-effective and efficient medication management, ultimately improving treatment efficacy. Our first application for this platform technology is for opioid addiction or opioid use disorder. 2.5 million people in the United States are diagnosed annually with opioid addiction, leading to an economic burden of more than $78 billion each year. Of course, it's not just an economic burden, right? There's also the social toll, and unfortunately, children often pay the highest price for that. The medication-assisted therapies are the gold standard for treating opioid use disorder, and they broadly fall into two bins. So if you look to the left, you see methadone and buprenorphine. You might know it as Suboxone. These are partial opioid blockers. They create a secondary dependence. They help curb cravings for something like heroin, but they only do a partial job. And this secondary dependence means that if you stop taking it, you might start to feel ill. And because of that, it does have some street value, so it can be diverted. On the right, you see naltrexone. You might know that as Vivitrol or Revia. Naltrexone is a total opioid blocker, which means if you take naltrexone and then you take heroin, you're not going to get a high. It completely blocks it. And there's no secondary dependence associated with that. So there's no diversion risk. It has no street value, basically. And because it's not a controlled substance, it's also easier to manufacture. So it's because of these reasons that we've chosen naltrexone as our first extended release platform. So naltrexone is currently available in daily and monthly formulations. People are at the greatest risk for relapse between doses when they're kind of making the decision, should I take my naltrexone or should I take heroin? The technology that Plum has developed will essentially put people at that crossroads instead of every day or every month, just 3 times a year. The market opportunity is quite large, unfortunately, because you'd only turn on the news and you see that the opioid epidemic is growing. About 10% of people who've been identified as having opioid addiction seek treatment. And if we narrow that down even more to our target market, we identified our first customers as people who are already taking naltrexone, specifically the 1-month naltrexone, because they're already seeing the benefit of something that's slightly extended release, and we think they'll see the greatest value in something going from 1 month to then 3 months. So the 1-month naltrexone it's Vivitrol, and it's currently made by a company called Alkermes. Alkermes reported $335 million in sales last year. So even a 2% market share of that business would be a little more than $6.5 million. This is our development plan for drug development. We're currently preclinical. Now, if we were developing a brand new drug, this whole timeline it could be 10 years and $1 billion. But because naltrexone has already been approved by the FDA, we're able to use something called the 505(b)(2) regulatory pathway, which allows us to essentially leverage the safety and efficacy data that's already been reported to the FDA, effectively shortening our timeline. We anticipate having a licensable FDA-approved drug in 3 years. We're seeking $750,000 in our first round to get us through our first milestone of a pre-IND meeting with the FDA. That'll help set the path going forward. We anticipate subsequent rounds that will be tied to objective and measurable milestones associated with the development of that extended release naltrexone. So monetizing this could go a couple of ways, and even within sales and licensing, it could go a couple of ways. But if we talk about sales, would be directly taking it to market. Licensing, it would be partnering with another pharma company that would be interested in the technology and licensing the IP. If we look at projections for sales, we would require an additional revenue round, or look for additional investments, and then would have sales revenue beginning in 2024. Comparing that to a licensing projection where we would see a more modest revenue, but we would see it a year earlier, and we wouldn't require that additional investment round. I'll finish up by just telling you a little bit about our team. We're anchored by our two founders, Dr. Lisa Krugner-Higby and Dr. Timothy Heath. They are both from the University of Wisconsin. Lisa is a veterinarian with over 30 years of experience in preclinical animal studies. Tim has over 40 years of experience as a biochemist and really was the inventor of our advanced quant load methodology for loading those liposomes. Paul Radspinner is on our board of directors. You might know Paul from Flugen. They're developing a universal flu vaccine. He has so much experience in pharmaceutical and biotech industries and is a pretty amazing fundraiser as well. And lastly, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I come from a clinical background in clinical research. I was at the University of Wisconsin, Madison for 15 years, go Badgers. I was part of a team that developed IP, and that was the impetus for a startup company here in Madison. And during my time there, I managed both internal and external teams to bring a product from the initial idea phase all the way to market. And I'm really pleased to be able to bring that knowledge and experience to Plum. We're Plum Pharmaceuticals, extended release formulations to improve human health. Thanks.
Thanks again to Jackie Hein and Plum Pharmaceuticals for their great story. In today's Tech Metrics, we'll take a quick look at R&D investment by industry, not academia, over a 20-year span in the Great Lakes states. The information here came from the National Science Foundation and SSTI, which is the State Science and Technology Institute in Ohio. When you look at this chart, you'll see some interesting things. Wisconsin, while having a strong manufacturing sector, is actually the lowest in terms of dollars invested in those Great Lakes states. The period covered includes 2 recessions, and especially the one in 2008 and 2010 that really hit the Midwest as hard as it possibly could. So this is just a quick glimpse at investment in the Midwest. It's worth noting that Wisconsin is historically among the top 3 manufacturing states in the country. Thanks again to our sponsors, BDO, UWM, and Exact Sciences. We'll see you next time.